Hi, my name's Chloe Drew. I'm a recent graduate of the University of Glasgow. I studied geography. I've always been very interested in sport. I was president and also captain of the Women's Rugby Club here at the university. And I'm joined today by Dr Donald Lyall, who is a senior lecturer in population brain health, and we're discussing how student experience and student health, the role of sport and exercise, and how that can all influence our brain health and well-being. I think where I wanted to start was, I think everyone knows how important your physical health is and your brain health is, and how sport can help that, but not actually understand why that is. So if you have any...
So there are a variety of explanations for that, and those explanations will span various different levels of science, whether it's people like myself who tend to work on existing data in humans, versus researchers who perhaps look at animal models. There's a variety of ways. So the most obvious ones from the work I tend to do are things like atherosclerosis, which is the buildup of fatty lipids and the stiffening of arteries. And what that does is it means that the blood can't get from the heart all the way to the brain quite the way that it should, the so-called heart-brain loop. Another way is poorer physical health, poor cardiometabolic health, is associated with the increased accumulation and reduced clearance of plaques in the brain, amyloid beta plaques, which are kind of a characteristic aspect of cognitive impairment in later life. As you get more to things like animal studies, people will have a variety of somewhat more minute explanations for why exercise is beneficial for the brain. But basically, a wide variety of explanations, all of which have quite good causal rationale underneath them.
Okay. So in our day-to-day life, what do you think, and what kind of benefits do you think we could see from physical exercise?
So physical activity is associated with better physical health, I think relatively obviously for a number of different reasons. And the benefits to that for your brain include that better physical health helps maintain things like fast reaction times, better memory, better aspects of reasoning. Now, from a student's perspective, that has, I think, quite obvious ramifications for things like studying. Better cognitive health is also associated, on average, with better quality of life as people get older. It's associated with low risk of psychological problems, and it tends to be associated with greater self-reported happiness. So, whilst it might not be an immediate impact tomorrow, you might not join the gym today and your life magically improves tomorrow. Over large numbers of data sets and over large numbers of people, there tends to be quite a strong correlation between more exercise, better health, and better brain health.
Okay, that's really interesting. I think definitely from a student perspective, like a lot of people when they're struggling with exams or essays, they have to say like, do some exercise, go to the gym, but why exactly is that good, and is there actually fact behind that?
So it's tricky to say, because a huge amount of the research that people tend to do, so the work I tend to do tends to look at existing data sets of large numbers of people, like UK Biobank or Generation Scotland. And often there isn't really data at that kind of minute level of, if I go to the gym today, will that improve my worldview in the 90 minutes that it takes for me to go to the gym and come back. So there isn't really the best, most consistent evidence that doing it right now will improve your life. But there is evidence that over sustained amounts of time, that people who engage in more exercise tend to be healthier and tend to be happier and tend to have low risk of psychological problems.
Okay. My next question was kind of, why is this important for young people to think about? See, most people coming to uni, kind of 17, 18 years old.
I vaguely remember.
Yeah.
Just about, yeah.
And a lot of the things about cognitive health are maybe in later life. So what's the benefit of us thinking about it now?
So there are two real answers to that. The first is that you have one brain, and it tends to kind of, on average, a lot of data from brain imaging and cognitive studies shows that your cognitive faculties peak around about 20. So that the brain white matter tract and integrity that underlies particularly reaction time peaks around about 20 and only really declines quite linearly from there. Other aspects of cognitive function with memory are a bit more kind of stepwise sort of thing. So the reason that it's important for people to think about these things now is first of all, you think healthy things like a good circadian rhythm, not too much alcohol, trying to avoid smoking, trying to have exercise and a bit of community engagement are all healthy things for physical and psychological health and for cognitive health. And that helps you with things tomorrow, like that. First of all, psychological health is kind of self-evident, but also that it improves things like concentration, reaction time, and that can hopefully have manifestations on your degree and your time at university. The second point is that as you get older, like I say, you've only got one brain. So university is a time of, for a lot of people, a great deal of personal kind of fluctuation. There's a lot of circadian rhythm disruption, you know, people are up at funny hours. Maybe they drink a little bit more than they do at various other stages of their lives. So thinking about these things now and the fact that you've only got one brain to carry you through the rest of your life, which seems very far away just now, and I can only barely remember being 18 and coming to university, but these things are important for those two reasons. First of all, what it means for your university experience today, and secondly, what it means for your brain for really the rest of your life.
So, kind of following on from that, what are the things that we could do now when we're young to kind of help keep improving our brain health? Yeah,
so the things that we know improve brain health, we have known fundamentally about health really for quite a long time, and that's things like exercise, smoking, trying to avoid imbibing substances and alcohol in too much excess. These things we have known for a very long time are associated firstly with physical health, so the health of your heart and the various cardiometabolic functions, but also that of cognitive and brain structural and functional health. So these things, they all tend to be correlated a little bit. So people who perhaps are healthy in one way, perhaps are healthier in other ways too.
So following on from what we spoke about, what are the kind of ways that we could improve our brain health now when we're young, and kind of keep that good cognitive?
So the things which are good for your brain are things that really we have known for a long time are fundamentally good for human health. So that's things like avoiding too much alcohol, avoiding smoking ideally, exercise, community engagement. So there's some evidence of avoiding pollution, some evidence of trying to avoid knocks to the head. So these things really have been known to health researchers for a very long time, and there probably will be more detailed minutiae about what's particularly good for your brain, but these absolute barn door things that you can do tomorrow have been known for quite a long time.
I think the part about sleeping and circadian rhythms I think is really interesting. I know it's definitely something I struggled with as a student. I was up till crazy hours some days and up for my 9 a.m s or
I remember.
But yeah, how important is the circadian rhythm?
So there's a lot of really interesting research into circadian rhythm, and the reason for that is that for a very long time researchers could only really base a lot of things, actually like physical activity and exercise too, off of self-reported data. And what we're seeing now is, you know, I've got my Garmin on. I have done 3,500 steps today at 11:30.
I've got mine as well.
and we are measured in a wide variety of far more objective ways than we were 10, 20 years ago. And what this means is that we can actually go back and study with much more detail things like circadian rhythms, how long do you sleep, what are various aspects of quality of your sleep. And what we're seeing is that it's extremely important for health. So maintaining a good circadian rhythm as a kind of a good rhythm throughout the week, throughout the day, and a good routine, and really committing to healthy sleep is, I think, only going to become more apparently important in the next few years as more and more research comes out.
So you mentioned about your Garmin watch, and I've actually just started wearing one.
We should probably say like non-denominational activity objective watch.
Definitely. I was wondering, if you had any kind of information on it, if it's actually beneficial, is it just big data?
So there's a lot of really interesting research coming out about summary level data from watches. So that's things like a research accelerometer would record millions of tiny movements throughout the day, and from that researchers can get loads of good information. But something like for legal purposes, a non-denominational activity watch, record things like step count. They record things like sleep, but not perfectly, so they can sometimes estimate things like that, not ideally. certainly compared with a research level accelerometer. But there is loads of really good interesting research coming out that even things like step count have a massive protective effect on health.
Okay.
Some of those outcomes are a bit broad, so it's just things like age and mortality, but I think we're only going to see more and more research coming out looking at objective measurements of health that we didn't have 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think I definitely have had a good day when I know I've got a badge and I've
Yeah,
achieved
yeah,
something,
Yeah.
And it's quite nice.
I get kind of annoyed where it just keeps upping the target.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, today is 11, tomorrow's 12, and I'm like, I'm happy with 11.
Yeah, the better
thank
you
very
do,
much.
the more they up the target.
Exactly, yeah, it's just
Doesn't seem
life in
fair.
a nutshell. Yeah, exactly, just constantly moving up.
Yeah.
Targets, yeah.
I think my next questions were kind of around sport and exercise. So obviously you said sport and exercise has a big benefit for physical and brain health, but I was wondering if there is any difference between sport, which I kind of associate with maybe more organised and kind of
Teamwork stuff.
sometimes, and then exercise, which might just be something you do by yourself and is kind of less formal. And if there's any difference in the benefits.
So it's tricky to say. I think I imagine there are probably some specific studies that have tested this, but they will probably have been quite small. What we can see in large scale population data is that various aspects of lifestyle tend to correlate. So it can be hard to extract the direct effect of just exercise on these various things, because there don't tend to be very many people who they exercise a lot, but they're very unhealthy in other ways. So what that means is that a significant amount of exercise's benefits probably does come from community and engagement to some extent, but it's tricky to say that team sports are necessarily superior in any way to exercise just on its own. So possibly, but it's hard to say.
Yeah. Do you think maybe it could have a bigger impact on your mental health?
Yeah, possibly, yeah. So we know from a lot of research that loneliness and not really having a sense of kind of community and engagement and support tends to be associated with worse psychological health. So there is slightly tangential evidence that yes, a sense of community and engagement probably is beneficial for particularly psychological health.
And then I think the next question was around where we're doing that exercise and sport, and because obviously they talk a lot about the importance of green space, going outside, getting your steps in, things like that, but is there a difference between doing an activity in a sports hall, going to a spin class inside, and then running outside or going on a bike ride? I think
it's difficult to say, and I suspect there are probably specific studies that have tested that, but again, they're probably not going to be very, very big studies. I think what evidence has shown is that things like natural light exposure and green space and blue space exposure fundamentally tend to be correlated with better psychological and physical and cognitive health. Whether that's specifically in the context of exercise or certain activities is somewhat harder to say. But overall, the beneficial effects of green space are very, very clear in epidemiological data.
So I was just wondering if you could give a bit more detail about how kind of our brain health and our psychological health are maybe linked.
So we've known for a long time that there are probably aspects of brain structure and function which underlie both cognitive health, so that's things like reasoning and memory and reaction time, and also poor psychological health in terms of things like anxiety and depression. Specifically anatomically why this goes on, I think a lot of research is trying to understand, but for the purposes of real life people out there, there are huge numbers of shared risk factors, so things like excessive alcohol, smoking, to some extent pollution exposure, sedentary behaviour, so that's really not enough exercise, not any kind of community engagement, whether that's teamwork type stuff. So for real people out there, they don't necessarily need to understand much about the actual brain anatomy of it. Lord knows scientists don't. But for real people, the main thing is trying to engage in a healthy lifestyle, of which exercise is probably quite a substantial component.
Okay. So obviously you spoke a little bit about anxiety and depression and loneliness. I think they're quite kind of important issues within the student population, and the wider population as well. But something I've always done to kind of deal with those and combat that is sport, and team sport especially. So I've not always been one to go to the gym alone or exercise alone. Always enjoyed more a team aspect, but I was wondering if there was actually any science behind that.
So I'm sure there are probably some studies which have contrasted individual exercise versus team specific exercises. But I imagine those studies are probably relatively small because they're often very hard to conduct. A lot of the things that are healthy for your heart and your psychological health and for your brain tend to be correlated. So things like exercise, people who have one aspect of healthy lifestyle probably have various other aspects too. So it can be difficult to parse out just that exercise specifically on a treadmill is what's improving your psychological and physical health. So there's a pretty strong chance, I would say, that a substantial amount of the benefit of exercise comes from engagement and getting up and getting out and potentially going and doing it with teammates.
Yeah.
Just because it's difficult to state from population data that specifically it's just the exercise that's giving you the benefit.
And is there anything to do with maybe doing a new sport and learning new skills and the impact that can have on your brain health compared to maybe doing something you've done quite a few times before?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting, tricky question where what we can say from population data and huge swathes of data from a variety of approaches is that exercise is good for your brain and it's good for your heart and it's good for your psychological health. Now, whether or not doing something new has added benefit of that, I don't know. There is a quite heterogeneous evidence over the benefits of things like brain training as people get older. So that thing of using cognitive engagement and learning a new skill and learning a new sport, there's definitely some potential for that to have some benefit for psychological and brain health, but it's just difficult to say just now based on the data that we have.
Okay. And then I'm not sure if this relates to your research that much, but I've always been quite interested in kind of visualization and how that can improve sport but also daily lives. And often when you've got kind of a big game or something new, an exam or something, they often say like, visualize yourself in that state or visualize yourself doing that thing. And I wondered if there was any science behind that.
I don't really know, if I'm honest. Certainly in terms of cognitive abilities, there are various different aspects of cognitive health which tend to correlate. So that's things like reasoning, memory, and reaction time. And a big part of those is what's called visual spatial abilities. So that's things like, can you manipulate information in your mind's eye? That's certainly something which is one of these faculties that only gets worse as you get older. So it's an important thing to try and preserve, whether that's through exercise or maintaining a healthy lifestyle.
I'm quite concerned that it goes down after 20.
Reaction time is the most linear, but it's very linear.
Okay.
Whereas other things like memory, they're kind of a bit more like that.
Yeah.
But
can you control or is it?
Yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to do, and all this stuff is what predicts the slope, you know. So I've got a study just now that I'm literally writing up all about people with healthier brains in midlife have so if you do better on tests of reasoning and information processing speed and memory, you have a much lower risk of dementia decades later. So what does that reflect? Is it just shared genetic influences? Is it, you know, these are the people who exercise more or drank more? We don't really know, but what we can see is that people with healthier brains, it's associated with better quality of life, lower risk of dementia, later mortality, all sorts of things. So yes, it has no end of benefits, a healthy brain, as you get older.
Yeah. And one last personal question.
Sure.
I was diagnosed with, I don't even know if diagnosed is the right word, but they gave me extra time for slow cognitive processing in school. And I don't really think it's something that I've actually seen the impact of, but there must be, I don't know. So, I don't really understand what it is, basically.
Yeah, so there, with all of this stuff, it's all averages. It's all that over 1 million people, the people with slightly worse memory scores had a slight increase in risk of dementia. Very, very, very few things in it. Short of, guillotine exposure and rapid cognitive impairment, None of these things, very, very few of these things are one-to-one. You know, there are smokers who live to 100 and you know, people who they live to 120 and they cite that they had a whiskey a day, and that's fine. But there will be athletes who drop dead at 30. So there are all of these things, this epidemiological work, it's all based on averages, that on average people with slightly worse memory or reasoning have higher risk of XYZ. So none of these things are necessarily deterministic at the individual level. You know, there will be outliers massively in basically every epidemiological finding that you see.
Okay, so not something to worry about.
As with anything in life, really, it's something that someone's worried about. You know, it's worth speaking to your GP. But certainly, none of these things are deterministic. You know, they are averages. And when you see a study in the news and it says, oh, X increases risk of Y, what they probably mean is that on average over 1 million people, X increased risk of Y by 1%, and it explains 1% of the data. So these things are not like, they're not deterministic at the individual level.
I was always quite intrigued because teachers kind of just do this test and tell you this is what you've got, but don't really explain why or like maybe how you can improve.
And the thing too is that a lot of these cognitive faculties tend to correlate. So if you have better reaction time, you often have better memory and better reasoning, but not all the time at all. Obviously, there are huge numbers of people where you know, these correlations are over large numbers of people, and they manifest in very messy ways. Often, if you see X increases risk of Y, and you see the scatter plot, it's often just a big mess. You know, and maybe there is a correlation there, but it's very far from being deterministic by a long shot. There are very, very few things in epidemiology which are cast iron, considered even necessarily causal. So, you know, smoking and lung cancer, we've kind of cracked that, but there are very, very few things which are necessarily causal, and there's a lot of research actually on what mitigates the effects of poor cognitive health on outcomes. You know, so if I have, say, a bad memory, what other variables mitigate that? If I have a bad memory, but I exercise and I avoid alcohol and I don't smoke, will I be better off in 30 years than somebody that did all these things? And that's kind of what we're actually trying to study here.
Very interesting, thank you for that.